So at 200 feet from the ground, which is not very high, you'll see the runway just pop up and you'll pop right below the clouds. And that is a good adrenaline rush, but...
Welcome to the Meaningful Work Podcast, your source for ideas, inspiration, and tools for unleashing your best, most fulfilling work yet. Now, your host, Josh Schneider.
Yes! Welcome to the show. Today's guest, Scott Rankin, he's a pilot. He's a pilot of jets. And I'm excited for him to be with us because what do they do in there? And so I'm excited to understand that. And one day we were hanging out and he started talking about the landings and what it's like. And so in the little bit that I know in just the preparation, the mindset, and how every day on the job, it doesn't matter what you've done yesterday, the last 20 years. What matters is this moment, is this day. I'm excited for us to unpack and learn from Scott. Scott, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Yes. All right. Listen, I got to know, just because, just tell us, what is it like to actually fly an airplane?
Well, it's pretty amazing. It's kind of a feeling that, just is unlike anything else. You drive a car, but when you take off and you feel that lift and you're actually in control of the airplane as opposed to just flying in the back, it's a very surreal feeling.
So obviously, how does one even want to become a pilot?
Well, I think I went through that, as a young boy. I want to be a firefighter, or I want to be a policeman or a pilot. And I think I just kept going with the pilot. And my mom actually got me it's called a discovery flight. And they take you up for about a half hour in a small little airplane. And they see if it's really what you want to do. And she thought that, it might scare me into not wanting to do it. And I got back and I was just so excited. I was asking my dad, when's the next time I can take lessons? When can I start? And I think I was 12 years old when this happened.
So you're 12, your mom tries to scare it out of you. And instead of scaring it, she locked in that sensation.
She did. And from then on, I started taking lessons a few weeks later, and it just blossomed from there.
So if you could go back to that moment in time, what was that sensation? What feeling or what overtook you that you were like, this is it?
As soon as you took off, the first time I was in control of the airplane, he let me pull back on the controls and we actually lifted off the ground, and I had a smile a mile wide on my face. In aviation, it's called having the bug, and I had it. As soon as we took off, I loved every minute of it. I didn't want it to end. We got back. I was just ready for more.
In some ways, it was unexplainable what you felt, but you caught something and it just felt right.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So obviously, you're not just you and an instructor in a little, what I would consider prop plane.
Yep.
Now you fly individuals around in a private jet, go on special secret missions to deliver things. I know within the last week, you were going to pick up a human organ, a heart, from one hospital system to another. And so when, obviously flying is still exciting to you, but when you think about your job, your work, what makes it exciting to you? What I don't want to say what gets you up in the morning, but what part of this is just you can't, when this moment happens, you're like, this is it.
I think it's just not knowing, I'm on call and you just wait for a phone call and you don't know where you're going. Nothing is scheduled about my job. I get a phone call and they tell me where I'm going, it's probably a place I've never been to. It's probably, a hard airport to get into. It's just not knowing where you're going to go that day. I just like that feeling of going different places each day. Yeah, I think that's it.
So, I mean, that's, so for me, I'm hearing like, well, first off, in my mind, it's like the bat phone rings. And you're like, what?
Essentially. Yeah. I mean, you're sitting there on call and, you get a phone call, it could be 3:00 in the morning and I'm on call. Hey, it's either cargo flight or the passenger jet. And it's, hey, go down from here, go down to Mexico, pick up some stuff, take it up to South Carolina, and then come home. So, I mean, you don't know where you're going to go. And it's hard leaving the family for that long and not knowing when you're leaving. But man, I just love that, not knowing where you're going to go and where you're going to end up each day.
So you love the rush of, in some ways, the unknown. And based on some of the small conversations we've had, flying and in some ways keeping safely getting from point A to point B is also another endeavor of unknown. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I guess I know what I want you to talk about, but I want you to talk about landing because it's like I remember like you were saying something along the lines of like, man, I had this, this landing and in it, I never thought about it. I know, flying Delta, it's, people clap when the jet lands. And to me, it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, why are we clapping? Like the expectation was we were going to, this was going to land and everything was going to go okay. And there's some cities I've flown into where it's extra windy and, you kind of it feels different. I had never thought about what it is like at the front. It's not autopilot taking you to the ground. Talk to us a little bit about like what that's like. What are you thinking about? What are you processing? What type of information are you taking in and what type of decisions? I mean, just spend a little time there because I got to know.
Well, there's a lot that, variables that, it's some airports, it's a nice day like today, it's sun's out and it's clear. And there's sometimes you come in for a landing and it's windy. It's rainy. It's bad conditions. You're getting bumped around. The people in the back aren't happy, but you're doing your best to get the airplane safely on the ground. But there's a lot of things that go into when you come in for a landing. But I mean, a lot of it is, not to speak for all pilots, but a lot of us, we'll go home that day and we'll just start thinking about, if we had a bad landing. It's just one of those things that keeps going through our head. But yeah.
So obviously the outside conditions, what are you looking at on what I would call the dashboard? Like, is this all visual? Are you taking in like what your eyes are seeing versus what some of your readouts are saying? Like, how are you safely? And then we're going to get back to what a bad landing is, because a bad landing to me sounds like you didn't make it home.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty scary to think about, but on a nice day, yeah, we're going to be looking outside the airplane, out our windshield in the front, looking at the runway and coming in on what's called a visual approach. Now, when it's bad weather and it's rainy and there's a low ceiling of clouds, we have to trust our instruments inside the airplane, because your body is going to tell you, hey, it feels like we're turning right or we're turning left, but actually the instruments are telling you what's actually happening. And it's very different than what your body actually feels. So you are trained to actually trust your instruments inside the airplane. So on a very bad weather day, we shoot what's called an approach, and it's only using the instruments inside the airplane until you're roughly, depending on the approach, but 200 feet off the ground. So at 200 feet from the ground, which is not very high, you'll see the runway just pop up, and you'll pop right below the clouds. And that is a good adrenaline rush, but those are some interesting days when you have to do that.
So you're not actually looking at the runway. You're focused on your dashboard. You're focused on what's in front of you.
Correct.
And
Yep. To a certain point, then you have to transition your eyes from inside the airplane to the outside and land the airplane on the runway. But you are very low on some approaches when you actually see the runway.
wow. So does like fog obviously then plays because that's like not connected to the clouds.
Yep. Low layer fog will, and there's a certain altitude for every approach for every runway is different, but you hit a certain altitude, and if you don't see the runway with your eyes outside the airplane at that specific altitude, you have to immediately go around and you immediately start climbing and doing
Okay.
You got to get out of there basically. So there's a certain point to which it's you got to stop the approach, but 200 feet is very not that high off the ground.
No, I mean the plane itself is is like 10% of that.
Right. Yeah.
Oh man. I mean, you said a lot of good things right there in terms of, there's moments and times when things just don't look right, and instead of just saying, okay, this is it, we recycle back. Sometimes there's additional challenges, there's additional obstacles. I'm just trying to imagine, like, your body's got to be surging with adrenaline, oxytocin, like you've got to be so dialed in that moment. Like it doesn't matter, like nothing matters. And when you're facing these obstacles, like what's your brain, what are you processing, or what are you thinking? Or does it just feel like a hollow tunnel and it's just you and you're looking for those things that you're like, okay, this is it. Let's go. 1, 2, 1, 2.
On those like approaches.
Yeah. I mean,
so it's actually a lot of the aircraft that I fly, the jet, it requires 2 crew members, and myself and the first officer on those approaches that take us when we don't see the runway until the last minute. We are constantly checking everything, make sure we got the right frequencies to track what we're doing, and each one of us has specific things to tell each other as we come down on that approach. So at from 1,000 feet until that specific altitude where we see the runway, we have to go around. He's calling that. I'm rechecking it. We're making sure that the instruments are working properly, because if one starts, moving around or it's not acting like it should, we're immediately going to get it out of there, because there's not a lot of wiggle room when you get way down there. And so it's constantly back and forth, talking to each other, making sure everything's okay, make sure everything's good. And we have specific call outs that we train to do when we go into a simulator to help train for these kind of events.
All right. So you mentioned simulator.
Yes.
So like, how much time have you spent, or do you still regularly go? Or I would imagine that this simulator is what has in some ways prepared you for so many of these challenges. What is that like? Like, what even happens in there, or how has it prepared you for these crazy moments?
It is every 6 months. I am required to go into that simulator, and it is 2.5 hours of me, a co-pilot, and an instructor sitting behind us who runs the sim on big computer screens. And he has the ability to sit back there and make the sim just make the airplane do anything really he wants to. He can make an engine catch on fire. He can, when we're coming into land, he can make a truck pull out on the runway and see what we do. So the training in the simulator is very helpful, because when we get in the actual airplane, it's without thinking, we just do things. And a lot of our big ticket items, I guess you could say, is like, when an engine fire happens, we have memory items. We don't reach down, grab a checklist, read it, and go through it, because by then your engine could be gone. So we have things that we do that, in the airplane it's happened, not so much the engine fire, but I've done things without even thinking or knowing that I did them because we've trained so much in the simulator.
And so how real is the simulator versus, like, how does it feel in comparison to actually flying the jet?
It feels pretty, I guess, the same. It's a little more sensitive, but the layout, everything in the cockpit is the same. And it's a pretty good feeling to it. It's a full motion. You pull back, you pitch up, like you're climbing. The simulator actually pitches up. So it gives you that feeling enough to really run through a checklist or do what you need to do to practice in the event something happens.
Huh. So if I wanted like a feel without the real thing, it would give me a good feel.
It would give you a very realistic feel. Yes. Yeah.
All right. So you said checklists and muscle memory. What I have heard in the past, and I think even on this podcast, we have talked about the impact of checklists, meaning I don't need to always remember every single thing. I have a checklist that helps my energy or my brain power stay focused on solving. So what are some things that you have like checklists for, but then I'm super interested in what you said, you don't have time for a checklist. We need muscle memory, or we have this memory that we can access immediately.
Yeah. So like for those big things main big things that happen, that are dire in the airplane, like an engine fire or an engine just quit, we have certain things that we remember, and it's normally 2, 3, 4 things maybe that we have to memorize. And that way we do them immediately. And then we have checklists that we go back to, and on the checklist, it's going to have you verify every memory item that you just did to make sure you did it all. And then it's going to continue on the checklist where you can go through the checklist and finish whatever you need to do for that event.
So in terms of this checklist, is there, like, obviously I've heard of a pre-flight checklist. So there's checklists for assessing what happened or what might have happened. How critical is a checklist in terms of, like, you approach the plane and, you're I'm the captain now. And what does a checklist look like in terms of successfully getting the jet off the ground versus a checklist in assessing something that happened?
There's getting the airplane off the ground. There's really no memory items. It's all following the checklist. So coming out to the airplane to start the day, when you get inside the airplane, there's a checklist you follow one by one to check everything. When the airplane's under its own power and we're moving towards the runway, we're taxiing. We read off of checklists to make sure and double check that we do everything we're supposed to. So when you're in the air, it's more so because if you're on the ground, you're going to the runway and something happens, you can stop. You can shut the engines down. But when you're in the air, it's a lot different. And you only have maybe minutes to figure out what it is and isolate the problem before it becomes something bigger. So it's very different between on the ground and actually when you're actually in the air. But there are checklists for everything in the air and on the ground.
So I would imagine if I were you, that at some point I'd be like, okay, I know all these items on the checklist. I don't need the checklist.
Right.
Is that like ever a pull, or is just a mature pilot, like, do you have that feeling pop up and you push it away, or is it just, do you not have that feeling at all?
Not really. It's all programmed, I guess you could say, into you during all your training. when you first start flying, everything is a checklist. When we're in the simulator, and myself as a professional pilot now, everything is just, you go by the checklist. You don't want to do anything off, like, oh, I don't need that. I do this every day. I've been flying for 10 years with this company. It's just, you don't want to do anything, because if you mess something up, you don't want it to turn anything bigger. You just want to follow the checklist, do it the way you were trained. And so I've never really had that feeling to just throw away the checklist and, have that mentality.
For all of us flying on airplanes, we thank you. And that, I think even in success in life, there are these habits and rituals that, we establish as humans. And I think some of us, we have a tendency to navigate away from them. And sometimes the most successful people, they know that this is what I do to have a successful day, or this is what I do to get in the zone, or whatever it might be. And it's just it's so fascinating. I'm like thinking in so many directions, because this is unfolded into so many, like in my brain, I'm seeing so many life parallels or success parallels, because, getting a day going and getting up in the air, it really, if you're like boom, 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 it creates such a more successful environment, or a successful set of directions. You're on the right track. You know what your to-do items are. You know what your high priority items are. And then you're moving forward and you're going to accomplish them. And on the way to accomplishing them is when you then need to be thinking, when you need to be analyzing. What type of analyzing do you do? What type of thinking? What are you processing once you're really up in the air?
Processing in terms of,
is there like a cruise control button and you're like,
there is, we do stuff in the air. We don't just, we aren't just sitting there, watching movies, on the airplane's Wi-Fi. It's not what we do.
Do another loop. This episode's almost done.
Yep. There is a lot of paperwork to do. There is an autopilot, which is required when you're so high, actually.
Sure.
It's required to be on. So there are, you're constantly talking on the radio. You're talking to other aircraft. You're talking to, when we fly across the country, we're talking to like centers. So it's people in a building that just have a chunk of airspace. So, every so often they'll hand you off to the next person as you fly to the West Coast. So you got to continuously check in. And, if you miss check-ins, or you don't, or your just communication fails between you and the ground, they're going to start getting very worried. So they're going to start calling your company. They're going to start trying to figure out, they're going to have other aircraft try and call you. So
Oh, this is good.
And I have had that happen. I have lost my radios. Well, we lost our radios, basically. We were flying from the South Carolina to Louisiana, and about halfway there, it had been to that point where we're like, we should have heard from someone, and we didn't hear from anyone. And they actually ended up calling, because the aircraft has a phone number attached to it for search and rescue purposes. So they actually called our company, and they were thinking, like, they don't know what was going on. They don't know why we're not. They see us on radar, and they see us continuing like we're supposed to, exactly like we're supposed to. And the first thing that they were worried about was us getting hypoxic. So lack of oxygen, like the plane depressurized to a point where when you get hypoxic, you can't think. You basically sound like a 4-year-old, I guess. And so they start getting very worried, because they need you to get lower if that is the case, which it wasn't the case. We just lost our communications with them. So it has happened. It does happen, but it's pretty interesting. I mean, every day is something new.
This is so good. Okay, you touched on one of my sweet spots, hypoxia.
Hypoxic.
And one of the things we discuss from the stage is when your employee brain is starved of that beautiful resource of doing work that matters, it begins to shut down. So can you tell us a little bit more about what going hypoxic or getting, I don't know the correct terminology, but when hypoxia sets in, like what, are you aware of it? What's happening to somebody who's going hypoxic?
So basically, you are not aware of it. Your brain is not going to be, it's going to get so low on oxygen that your brain, when you're flying, is not going to be telling you, hey, you're getting hypoxic. Like, put on that oxygen mask that's sitting right next to you. You're just going to start, like, being slap happy. Like, you've been up forever, and you get to that certain point where just everything's funny, and that's basically what happens. And that's scary because when you're flying an airplane, you just can't, when you get hypoxic, you can't comprehend everything. And they've done like tests and studies, and they've put people in chambers and lowered the oxygen levels, and they gave them like, a round peg, and they spend like an hour trying to fit it into a square hole. Like, and these are like grown people, so it's pretty scary to think about, but it is a very real possibility to actually happen. And it has happened a lot to aircraft, and there's a lot of recordings of it, and it's pretty scary what they sound like when you hear them talk on the radio when they are hypoxic.
One of the videos I play in the keynote is a pilot who has gone hypoxic, and he's saying like, I don't have airspeed, I don't have altitude.
Yeah.
But other than that, everything is A-okay.
Yep.
Oh. And there's no internal like feedback monitor for you personally to know whether or not you've slipped into this.
No. You would get an indication, like a light would come on of the cabin pressure, but your brain isn't going to look at that light being hypoxic and comprehend it and be like, hey, this light's on, do something about it. So you would probably keep staring at the light, but it has happened. Yeah. And I've heard that recording that you were talking about, and that guy, I laughed because he turned out okay, but they got him, luckily they got him to a lower altitude, which got more oxygen and pressurized the cabin. And then his voice completely changed from when he first was talking, when he says, am I okay? And then he got lower, and then he starts talking, and he's a completely different person. So it's pretty scary.
Crazy. One of the ways that we kind of I address it is that, there are people who are showing up to work every day who have this, their employee brain has hypoxia. As managers, as leaders, we're looking at people and we're saying, why can't they get it? And I pose the idea that it's not a lack of effort. It's not that this person's not trying. They've gone, maybe not that they've gone slap happy, but they've spent an incredible amount of time trying to get a square peg into a round hole. And we're looking at them like, can you get it? And they're trying, but they're just not aware that they've entered this state that, is so hazardous to their working health. Obviously quite different than a pilot or anybody that's up in the air, but
right, yeah,
so fascinating.
Yeah, I know.
This is good. Okay, so final question before we get to the fireside chat.
All right.
You're in the air.
Okay.
And something starts going sideways. What is the first emotion that you have?
Starts going sideways. So
let's just say like it all of a sudden, because I'm sure you got side view mirrors on those things, but you look in your side view mirror and all of a sudden the engine is on fire, which I don't think has happened to you, but like something goes wrong. Like what in this moment of chaos, in this moment of challenge, like what overtakes you?
It's almost like tunnel vision. When you see the we have a panel up there and it's got a bunch of red lights and you never want to see those go on. But when you see one go on, no matter where I'm looking in the airplane, I always see that light pop on and it's like a tunnel vision, just straight to it. And it's like and I stare at it for a second and it seems like I'm staring at it for like 5 minutes, but it's actually a few seconds. And I think it's my brain just comprehending what is actually happening. And then immediately we go to, if there's a memory item for it or if there's a checklist for it, we'll immediately go to it. But it has happened. But
and I myself am somebody who kind of doesn't enjoy red flashing lights on a dashboard, but in moments of chaos or challenge or difficulty, I once heard somebody say, if you're in over your head by an inch or you're in over your head by 10 feet, it doesn't matter because you're in over your head. And I think there's some personalities that like we just, it's not that we seek a difficult challenge, but when those moments arise, it becomes so natural to just step up and obviously in your situation, being excited for the challenge is different, than a massive shift in the market for somebody, or somebody who loses a client or something. It's not life or death per se, but there's those moments of. So our oldest daughter's learning to swim, and so we let her go in the pool without her life vest on or life jacket, and she got a little bit too close to the part where the shallow end and the deep end start to traverse, and I'm looking at her, and we've discussed how to kick your feet, we've discussed how to kick your arms, and I'm watching her, and all of a sudden her eyes start to give the like uh-oh, as I think her toes started to not touch the ground, and I was so proud of her because even though she was freaking out, she like immediately clicked in to like, she kind of bobbed underwater and she immediately clicked in and started kicking her feet, started moving her arms, and instinctively like started to move towards the side of the pool. And I mean, it wasn't like 2 seconds, but we were able to reach in and help her. But afterwards, just talking to her and saying, hey, like, I know that was scary. I know, like, but what you did was so incredible because I feel like some people, situations like that happen, they just lock up and sink. And life presents such incredible opportunities to have these moments that you just get to step up, and in that stepping up, you learn so much about you. You learn about your ability to be resilient and not quit. And so when we get to the fireside chat, I'd love to hear, what are some moments in your journey that maybe were pivotal moments in terms of, should I quit? Is this right for me? Is this challenge too big? But Scott, really appreciate you coming on the show, taking some time to give us some insight into what a crazy career.
Hey, no problem.
And some incredible experiences. And we're going to dive deeper into those and some of the pieces of your job that just make you say, what, in the fireside chat.
All right. Sounds good.